There is an invisible yet immensely powerful force that drives every human connection, the unconscious. Behind each overwhelming passion, behind every deep desire, lie psychological patterns working silently, guiding feelings and shaping behavior. Once we understand these hidden forces, we cease to be hostage to chance and begin to create consciously the experiences we long to live. This video unveils 3 psychological triggers which, when applied with authenticity and awareness, awaken a profound emotional bond in any man. More than mere seduction tricks, these triggers touch unconscious layers where the need for belonging resides, where the archetypal impulse for union lives, and where the yearning for wholeness dwells. Prepare to dive into knowledge that goes far beneath the surface and to transform forever the way you relate. If this message resonates with you, leave a comment. I open myself to the power of true connection. Carl Jung's analytical psychology teaches us that what draws one person to another is not simply appearance, words, or calculated gestures. It is the resonance between unconscious minds. When someone touches deep aspects of our being, especially those we deny or repress, we feel magnetism. This is where psychological triggers come into play. They do not manipulate, but rather activate dormant parts of the psyche. Jung called this projection the mechanism by which we see in another those qualities and desires that, in truth, exist within ourselves. By understanding and using these triggers consciously, we awaken universal archetypes, such as the hero, the lover, the wise woman, or the king, that live in the collective unconscious. These archetypes wield immense power because they evoke deep, timeless feelings. When a woman, for example, activates the anima archetype within a man, his inner feminine principle, she not only attracts him, but reconnects him with his own wholeness. It is in this symbolic space that love becomes something greater than mere affinity. Another fundamental concept is the shadow, that which we hide from ourselves, yet which drives our actions behind the veil of consciousness. By mirroring the other's shadow, not as something destructive but as a bridge to acceptance, a woman can provoke an overwhelming emotional transformation. It is in this symbolic interplay that desire intertwines with the soul. Using the right triggers is therefore an invitation to individuation, the process of becoming whole, and on that path, love becomes alchemy, not an escape from oneself, but a deep encounter with all that we are. Vulnerability is one of the most misunderstood elements in attraction dynamics. In a society that prizes emotional control, self-sufficiency, and power games in relationships, showing vulnerability can seem risky. However, from a Jungian standpoint, vulnerability is a direct bridge to the soul. It dismantles the ego's masks, what Jung called the persona, and reveals authentic aspects of the self. When a woman allows herself to be vulnerable in a conscious way, she accesses her own psychic center and invites the other to do the same. The first psychological trigger appears when this emotional openness is offered without neediness, without demands, and without expectation of immediate reciprocity. It is a genuine exposure of self, like sharing a real fear, a painful memory, or an intimate joy that carries deep meaning. This disarms the other's emotional defenses and activates empathy. In Jungian terms, it is as if the man's persona, his social mask, his rational defensive role, is challenged to yield space for his deeper self, initiating contact with his own anima. The anima is the feminine archetype present in the man's unconscious. She represents intuition, emotion, care, and sensitivity. When a man encounters a woman who not only embodies these qualities herself, but offers them without fear of judgment, he is confronted with his own need for integration. Something within him recognizes itself in that feminine presence. This transcends seduction. It is a symbolic activation of psychic forces that bring transformation. The feeling that arises is a mixture of fascination, identification, and the desire to protect. Yet it is essential to understand that vulnerability is not fragility. Jung warned against confusing surrender with submission. True vulnerability is a powerful strength because it arises from self-awareness and the acceptance of one's own shadows. When someone owns her pain without victimhood and her joy without egoic exaltation, she communicates integrity. That psychic integrity is enormously attractive because it represents a center of balance, something the male unconscious compulsively seeks when still out of equilibrium between anima and persona. Moreover, Genuine vulnerability breaks the pattern of relationships based on power plays. The collective unconscious is saturated with stories in which love is measured by control, manipulation, and conflict. When a woman chooses to step outside that pattern and presents herself as both whole and open, she is in practice enacting an individuation movement. And the individuation process, Jung teaches, has its own magnetism, because every human being at some level longs to find in another what he lacks to become complete. Thus, the first psychological trigger is not a technique, but an inner stance. It demands self-knowledge and courage. It requires looking inward and acknowledging one's wounds without wanting to hide them or use them as emotional currency. Vulnerability, when integrated into the Jungian path, is an act of self-love that invites the other to love not an idealized image, but the real essence of being. Ultimately, whoever allows herself to be vulnerable opens a portal to the sacred in the relationship. She awakens not only interest and desire, but also an archetypal connection that transcends time, ego, and emotional defenses. It is in this symbolic field that true bonding emerges, one built not on promises, but on the silent resonance between two internal worlds that recognize each other. Predictability is comfortable, but unpredictability keeps the flame alive. When it comes to deep attraction, especially in its early stages, the unconscious yearns for stimulation, discovery, and mystery. Carl Jung understood that desire does not spring from what is static, but from what transforms. The male mind, often conditioned to seek control and structure, is naturally drawn to what symbolically breaks patterns, and this is precisely where the second psychological trigger reveals itself: the capacity to provoke enchantment through authentic unpredictability. This is not an invitation to erratic or manipulative behavior. It is about cultivating a presence that is in constant evolution, one that surprises not by artifice, but by vitality. When a woman expresses her multiple facets with authenticity, at times gentle, at times intense, contemplative in one moment, daring in the next, she activates a powerful archetype in the collective unconscious, the lover. This archetype is not limited to eroticism. It represents pulsating life, creativity, mystery, and the energy of desire as a bridge to the soul. For Jung, the lover archetype is an essential feminine force. When consciously embodied, it shatters the stagnation of emotional routine and rekindles the vibrancy lost in many relationships. Unpredictability, then, is not the absence of direction. It is a dance with spontaneity. It is making every interaction reveal something new, unexpected, and intriguing, not to keep the other trapped in curiosity, but to remind that the human being is multiple and expansive. The male unconscious reacts strongly to pattern disruption. When it meets someone who defies emotional linearity and unveils unrevealed layers over time, it faces an enigma, and the unconscious loves enigmas. This stimulus activates the symbolic process of quest, akin to the hero's journey, a recurring theme in archetypal narratives. Unconsciously, the man becomes an explorer of an emotional territory he does not master but yearns to know. It is in that quest that the bond is born, not from conquest achieved, but from the constant possibility of rediscovery. However, unpredictability requires integrity. Used as an isolated strategy, it loses its archetypal power and becomes manipulation. But when it springs from a woman who allows herself to be multiple, fluid, and faithful to her transformations, it communicates an essential truth: that the human soul is not linear, but symbolic, cyclical, alive. And it is this pulsation of the soul that generates lasting enchantment. By activating the lover archetype through unpredictability, the woman also triggers within the man the unconscious memory of his own repressed sensitivity. The lover not only seduces, she awakens. She calls the other to open up to the beauty of experience, to the fluidity of feelings, to the pleasure of not knowing fully. In a world saturated with answers, being a presence that invites questions is, paradoxically, irresistible. Unpredictability anchored in self-knowledge also reveals the capacity for constant expansion. Jung spoke of the importance of not fixating on a single self-image. What is fixed in the ego tends to generate psychic stagnation, but when a person acknowledges her manifold aspects and expresses herself freely, without fear of seeming incoherent, she embodies the soul in its living form. And that vitality is contagious. At its core, true attraction is always spiritual on some level, not because it involves religiosity, but because it touches the mystery of existence. Unpredictability reveals that there is still something to discover, something beyond control and logic, and in that space love ceases to be an ego's promise and becomes an experience of the soul. Within every human being, there is a rejected, repressed, or ignored part, the shadow. Carl Jung described the shadow as the unconscious side of personality, composed of all that the ego does not acknowledge or deems undesirable. Yet it is precisely this hidden part that, when confronted symbolically and relationally, awakens the most intense emotions, both of conflict and connection. When a woman can, consciously or unconsciously, mirror a man's shadow, she provokes a deep emotional reaction. Although uncomfortable at first, this reaction can transform into powerful attraction. Mirroring the shadow does not mean pointing out flaws or criticizing. It means touching on non-integrated aspects of the other's psyche through one's own presence, attitudes, or authenticity. For example, a woman who expresses herself with emotional freedom may awaken in a rigid man the pain of his own effective repression. A woman who lives with intensity can activate the anger or fascination of a man who has stifled his creative impulses. In this symbolic mirroring, she is not the threat. It is his own shadow surfacing into consciousness. What occurs in this process is what Jung called projection. The man projects onto the woman that which exists within him, but which he has not yet recognized. If the woman sustains this projection with presence and integrity, without identifying with it or trying to control it, she becomes a channel for him to begin integration. It is at this point that intense emotional attraction is born, the sense that this person, in some mysterious way, sees him completely, including what he himself avoids seeing. This type of connection transcends superficial seduction. It is no longer about charm or appearance, but a profound inner movement. The woman becomes a symbolic mirror that, through her own wholeness, confronts the other's fragmented parts. And by doing so, she invites, without words, the man to traverse his own dark night of the soul. The magnetism that arises in this process is archetypal because it touches an ancestral longing of the soul to be seen and accepted in completeness. However, it is crucial that the woman who activates this trigger be in the process of integrating her own shadow. Otherwise, she may be swallowed by the other's projection and lost in destructive emotional games. Jung was clear that the shadow must be known and embraced internally before being used as an instrument of awareness in relating to another. When this happens, the woman does not react to the man's unconscious impulses with fear or submission. She recognizes them, holds them with firmness, and offers a clean symbolic mirror. What makes this trigger so powerful is that when mirrored with compassion, the shadow generates trust. The man feels he can be imperfect, contradictory, even confused, and yet be welcomed. This experience is rare. Most social interactions demand masks, roles, and control. To find someone who accepts complexity without judgment is transformative, and that transformation creates deep, lasting bonds. Mirroring the shadow, therefore, is not a power play. It is a symbolic offer of healing. When a woman is unafraid of a man's pain, insecurity, or unresolved impulses, because she recognizes all of this in herself, she builds a bridge between two unconscious minds. And this bridge, however silent, carries an irresistible energy. Real attraction arises not only from admiring another's virtues, but from the loving acceptance of shared imperfections. In summary, the third psychological trigger manifests when a woman becomes, for a man, a living opportunity for reconciliation with his forgotten parts. She needs not utter a word. Her presence, her choices, her inner truth say it all. And in that invisible field where the ego wavers and the soul awakens, a kind of attraction emerges that no conventional script can explain. In Carl Jung's analytical psychology, the animus is the masculine archetype present in the woman's unconscious, just as the anima represents the feminine in the man's. These archetypes are not merely internal images of the opposite sex, but profound psychic forces, shaping how we perceive, react, and relate to the world. The animus, in particular, influences how a woman thinks, argues, sets boundaries, and frames her relationship with action, logic, and authority. Integrating the animus means acknowledging these qualities within oneself, rather than projecting them onto another, especially in romantic relationships. When a woman fails to integrate her animus, she tends to project it onto her partner, idealizing him or expecting from him behaviors that actually reflect unrecognized internal aspects. She sees in him the protector, the decision-maker, the center of strength, and in doing so, weakens her own inner axis. This creates emotional dependency, frustration, and asymmetrical dynamics. Conversely, when she integrates her animus, embracing within herself the capacity to stand firm, think clearly, maintain coherence, and make conscious decisions, a radical shift occurs in how she relates. That shift activates a new kind of energy in interaction with men. The woman begins to emit a vibrational field of completeness, not of lack. This awakens in men a mature response. They do not feel pressured to fill emotional gaps, but are invited to connect with someone already walking her authentic path. This feminine stance, rooted in quiet inner strength, evokes respect, the desire for closeness, and the impulse for true partnership. The man feels inspired to improve himself, not by imposition, but by spontaneous admiration. At this point, the relationship begins to function as a two-person individuation pathway. For Jung, individuation is the process by which the individual becomes what he truly is in essence, unifying his internal opposites. When two people enter a bond where both are on their individuation journey, the relationship ceases to be a flight from personal shadows and becomes an evolutionary mirror. Each sees in the other not what is missing, but what complements, and is simultaneously challenged to grow. The woman who has integrated her animus does not reject the masculine in another. On the contrary, she recognizes, values, and welcomes the partner's energy, but she neither places him on a pedestal nor uses him as validation. She knows that her own masculine within can provide inner guidance, mental clarity, and active presence. This emotional autonomy creates space for the man to approach freely, without fear of being absorbed or burdened with satisfying unconscious demands. He feels he can love openly, because there is room for true love, one based not on lack but on overflow. This kind of connection is rare but profoundly powerful. When the animus is integrated, the woman communicates firmly without aggression, expresses desire without manipulation, and holds her values without rigidity. She becomes, in the man's eyes, a figure who not only attracts, but symbolically guides, not in a hierarchical sense, but archetypally. The male soul recognizes this energy as something familiar and essential. It is the conscious, mature feminine that integrates love with freedom. Furthermore, this integration awakens a very particular energetic quality. The woman begins to radiate presence. She need not make a show or assert herself constantly. Her strength is silent yet absolutely perceptible. This resonates in the male unconscious as stability and wholeness. Paradoxically, it is this completeness that makes the bond stronger, because it allows the relationship to be a choice, not a necessity. Integrating the animus, therefore, is one of the greatest gifts a woman can give herself, not only for the natural attraction it generates, but because it represents an advanced stage of psychic maturity. When two mature souls meet, love becomes more than an emotional experience. It becomes a spiritual path of expansion, a symbolic awakening process, a space where both can be true and whole. Throughout this video, we have delved into the unconscious to understand how certain psychological triggers can forge authentic, lasting bonds. We've explored how conscious vulnerability stirs emotional connection, how unpredictability activates archetypal desire, how the presence of the inner mother evokes the instinct to protect, and how integrating the animus transforms a woman into a magnetic pole of presence and wholeness. None of these elements are magic formulas. They are symbolic expressions of self-knowledge and inner integration. True power of attraction arises from the meeting of two inner worlds that recognize each other. When you access your own archetypal forces, you awaken in the other something that words cannot explain, a silent call to what is real, profound, and eternal. This is the beauty of conscious love. It begins within you. If this content has resonated with your journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. And don't stop here. Click the video now appearing on your screen to continue diving into the psyche's transformative power. Your presence here is already a step toward your own individuation. Until we meet again, may your truth inspire true connections.